Hi there, it's Dave Hilton from Resolution Stream, and today we're going to talk about and define conflict resolution. I get that question a lot in my work is what exactly is conflict resolution? So stick with me here and hopefully you'll really get some value out of today's conversation. So what is conflict resolution? Now, nearly all conflict, and you'll hear me talk about this in a lot of the videos that I do, nearly all conflict is caused by someone's expectations not being met. Now, that can happen in your business life. That can happen in your personal life. Let's say your kids don't clean their room when you ask them to. That's conflict. Let's say a barista at your favorite coffee shop makes sure it does your order wrong. That's a little bit of conflict. Now, it's not super serious conflict, but it's still conflict. So just keep that in mind. And Dr. John Gottman, by the way, were the source of this, nearly all conflict is caused by somebody's expectations not being met, is a world-renowned relationship expert. I mean, he spent decades talking with people about their relationships and where conflict comes into that. So conflict resolution is this. It's an essential communication skill. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're maybe an aspiring or you're a current small business owner, maybe you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're a student, maybe you want to be an executive or you are an executive right now in business. No matter where you are in your professional life or even your personal life, conflict resolution, these skills, these processes, an essential communication skill. It's also an essential leadership skill. If you want to be in leadership, it's not about managing people, it's about leading people. And with these conflict resolution skills, you can do that and you can do that well. Conflict resolution is a learnable process, and that makes a lot of people happy because a lot of people are afraid. When you start talking about conflict, I see it in their eyes. I see it on their faces of it's an uncomfortable, very uncomfortable conversation when you start talking about conflict and people's issues and conflicts and disputes and stuff like that, but it's a learnable process. So conflict resolution and all the processes under that umbrella, you can learn that. It's known by many other names, and here's where a lot of the confusion comes in because depending on where you live and what books you read, what websites you read, it may be known as other words other than just conflict resolution, but it could be also known as conflict communication. There are a lot of books and scholarly articles and stuff like that that talk about conflict communication, and in fact, you'll see that I interchange it sometimes, conflict resolution to conflict communication, conflict management. So sometimes, and it's just the way of life, it's just human, that sometimes conflict can't be resolved. Sometimes the best you can do is to manage conflict. And I'll give you a prime example. When you talk politics, and I know you're thinking, Dave, why are you talking about politics? I'm not going to go into politics, but politics itself. If you look here in the United States, when you've got the Democrats, you've got the Republicans, and they're always in conflict about what each one believes, right? That particular conflict will never be resolved, but it can be managed when other things need to happen. So sometimes the best you can do is to manage the conflict. So you might hear people say conflict resolution, you might hear other people say conflict management, but by using those terms, you sort of get an idea of how serious they think the conflict is. Dispute resolution is another term. So it could be conflict resolution, it could be dispute resolution. Another one is alternative dispute resolution. This is used a lot in the courts and stuff, also known as ADR. And you've also got online. I didn't add this to the slide here, but online dispute resolution is a new thing, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of people who do the work that I do around the world have had to move their services online. So it's now online dispute resolution is a big thing. Now, there are people in the conflict resolution, dispute resolution world that will debate me on this. It's not a conflict, it's just a debate on whether these final two things really are the same thing as conflict resolution, because they believe that a dispute is something that is short-term, whereas a conflict is something that's long-term and has more underlying issues. So I tend to agree with that, but I just wanted to bring up that you might also hear about these conflict resolution strategies and processes by these other names: conflict communication, conflict management, dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, or even online dispute resolution. So just keep that in mind, that disputes, conflicts, sometimes short-term, long-term. I can cover that in probably a different video. Again, as I said earlier, my name is Dave Hilton. I am a conflict resolution consultant. I'm a conflict coach, negotiation trainer, and a mediator. Most of my mediation work is done in Texas. And you can actually, on our website there at resolutionstream.com, you can see links to my LinkedIn page. You can also find me on mediate.com, so you can see that I do in fact do this work. So if you want to learn essential negotiation and conflict resolution skills online, that is why I created Resolution Stream, and the website is to help people, as I mentioned, entrepreneurs, small business owners, aspiring business owners, entrepreneurs, or executives learn these essential negotiation and conflict resolution skills online. You can also go to the website and schedule a free 30-minute conflict strategy call. So that's sort of like a free conflict coaching session, just finding out, what's happening in your life. Do you have a specific conflict that you need some help with, or just need to come up with some creative options? I do a free 30-minute conflict strategy call. You can check out all the details about that at resolutionstream.com. So I also ask that for all these videos, and I'm going to continue to do them once a week, most likely posting these live videos every Tuesday. I'm going to do that here on YouTube, and this is where you go to the Resolution Stream YouTube channel, you subscribe. Once you hit that, click the little bell button so that you get a notification every time I do one of these live streams, just as a reminder that you want to go and watch this video. I ask that you do the same thing on Facebook. You can like the Resolution Stream page, and then you click the three little dots there and the follow settings, and then you see first. That way, whenever I do one of these live videos, it pops up on your feed earlier and it doesn't get buried with all the other stuff. And then again, also on LinkedIn as well, the Resolution Stream page there. If you'll follow that, whenever we post new videos, you'll be able to see those. So let's talk about conflict. As I said, conflict is an extraordinarily uncomfortable subject for a lot of people to talk about. But that's why it's so important to learn these skills to resolve or manage the conflict. So there are 5 common forms of conflict communication or conflict resolution or dispute resolution that you'll probably see a lot about if you read any negotiation books, if you read any of those books, websites, that sort of stuff. And if you search, just do a Google search for conflict resolution, you'll see a lot of these options pop up for you. One of them is facilitation and or conflict coaching. Those are a couple of options there. A facilitation is just where you bring somebody, a neutral third party in to just have a conversation with one person, with a group of people who are dealing with a conflict. And the same thing with conflict coaching. That can be done either one-on-one or in a group setting. So that's a common form of conflict communication. Another one is negotiation. AKA an assisted negotiation. So you can act as a negotiator for your business, for your company or whatever, but you can also hire a third party to assist with a negotiation. And I'll tell you, one of the things, and I'll talk about this in another video, but I want to bring it up. It's a lot easier to negotiate for somebody else than it is to negotiate for yourself. But I'll talk about that in a future video. Mediation is another one. In fact, that'll be next week's video is all about mediation. Neutral evaluation. Now you're starting to bring in attorneys in this. And a neutral evaluation is when somebody has a conflict and they're thinking about filing a lawsuit. A lot of times one or both parties of this will actually submit all of their information to another attorney, another counselor, who will look at all of the information and kind of determine whether their case has any merit, whether it should be. But that's again, you're heading into the courts and that kind of thing. Arbitration is another one. So the big organization that does arbitration, this is one type thing that I don't do arbitration, but you've got the American Arbitration Association, and a lot of those are attorneys as an arbitrator, as well as retired judges act as an arbitration. So facilitation, coaching, and negotiation and mediation, all of those are like third party, not unbiased, neutral people. The more you move into the evaluations, into the arbitration, that's where you bring your case to somebody. It's not necessarily in the court, but you bring your case to somebody else, and they make a decision that's either binding or non-binding. So you can sort of think about all of those forms of conflict communication as this step ladder, sort of like this graph right here. So a lot of times what I do is, you always talk about, and you'll hear this, the more you learn about conflict resolution and dispute resolution and mediation and these types of skills, you're going to hear about conflict escalation. So the way I like to look at it, or picture it in my head, and these were these things that I was talking about just a minute ago, by the way, in this frame, were all of those third party, the arbitration, the mediation, the facilitation, the coaching. But I like to picture this as an actual escalator. And as you go up the escalator into this big void, this big red void, you're not going to like what you get. So the higher you go, the higher you escalate the conflict, the worse it's going to get. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this. It's the conflict continuum. I know maybe if you're a science fiction fanatic, if you're a fan of science fiction, you might think of a continuum like the space-time continuum. It's sort of like, I would say more like Doctor Who with the conflict continuum, because you can bounce around from one point to the other a lot whenever you're going through this conflict continuum. And I'm going to talk about some of these. If you look at those things that were in that frame a little while ago, to the left there on the screen, all of the facilitation and coaching and the mediation and that sort of thing, it's all to the left. Those types of things, you remain in control because you're bringing in a third party who is just there to guide you through that conflict resolution process, guide you through the mediation process, facilitate conversations, do conflict coaching to help you come up with creative options to resolve or manage your conflict. So you remain in control of the final outcome if you stay on the left side of the conflict continuum. Now, the moment you go over to the right side, as you get these darker colors into the orange and dark orange and red, that's where you lose control of the final outcome of what happens in the conflict. So you want to try to stay to the left, not to the right in the conflict continuum if you want to remain in control. So the first part of that conflict continuum is avoiding conflict. That is, it's a valid option. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't manage the conflict. It sort of pretends that it doesn't exist, even though it is still there. And chances are, if you go too long with unresolved conflict, it's just going to grow. It's going to grow quietly, but it's going to be even worse to deal with in the future if you don't deal with it. So one of the options, though, on the conflict continuum is to avoid that particular conflict. Next up, what we were talking about, the facilitation, the coaching that you can do. Again, you're remaining in control on the left side of the conflict continuum. Next up there is the negotiation, whether you're negotiating with the other party yourselves or you bring in somebody to assist you with the negotiation. And this could be, I mean, in this form, a conflict is anything whenever you're trying to distribute something. A lot of people talk about that, negotiation, that type of thing. It's part of sales as well. If you work in the sales field at all, a negotiation is part of the sales process. So it is part of the conflict continuum. It's just not, a violent type. Everybody thinks that when you talk about conflict, that it's, violent. That's the first thing that they think about. So I'll cover that again in a future episode, a future video about what actual conflict is. How do you define conflict itself? So negotiations next as you go up the escalator here of the conflict continuum. After that is the mediation. That's where you bring that third party in to help facilitate an actual agreement. I mean, that's the end goal. You try to find ways to creative options of working with the parties to come up with some sort of agreement. A mediated settlement agreement is what you'll hear that called. Another thing, that neutral evaluation, again, this is where you're bringing in an attorney. So maybe your attorney and the other party's attorney, they come together and they submit all their information to another attorney. And it not necessarily, as I said, not both parties have to do it. One party can just submit it for a neutral evaluation. Do we have any merit with this case? Should we go ahead with the next step of this with arbitration? And a lot of times what will happen is, and remember I was talking about you can bounce back and forth. So you may initially start off with a neutral evaluation. I want to sue. That's what I want to do. I want to sue these people because this conflict is unresolvable, unmanageable, and I just want to go ahead and sue. And your attorney might say, well, you know what? I'm not sure the merits of this case or whether you might actually win. So why don't we do a neutral evaluation and I'll submit the information. And so what will happen is if they come back and say, yes, I think this case does have merit, they may actually go towards an arbitration or litigation, which is coming up in a second, or you might bounce back down if you find out that after the neutral evaluation that you don't have a whole lot of merit. You might, you know what, let's go ahead and try mediation, or you know what, let's go back down to facilitation here, maybe get a coach, and maybe we can work this out after all. And as I said, next up there, litigation. That's the next step. This is where the courts get involved. Now, once you hit this step right here, specifically with arbitration and litigation in this orange section, that's where you start losing control, because an arbitrator, they are going to decide the outcome. Now, again, it can be binding and it could be non-binding. It just depends on the arbitration itself. And you'll see a lot of companies that you deal with have mandatory arbitration clauses. And the reason why they do this is because they don't want to be sued, and they want you to do this arbitration, which would be binding arbitration. You'll see that in a lot of the terms of service for a lot of the big companies that you use. So litigation's next up there. That's when you're actually going to court. And sometimes You might get into court. The judge may listen to initial arguments, might review part of the case and say, you know what, we're not going to do this in my court. Why don't you try mediation? In fact, in a lot of states, there is mandatory mediation. You file your lawsuit or whatever, and the judge may say, yeah, let's go ahead and kick that in mediation. They also may make it so it's not mandatory, but it's still an option. The judge may say, you know what, you may not want to deal with this, or tell your attorney that you may not want to deal with this. Why don't you guys go to mediation and see if you can resolve that? And I'll talk about that in future videos too. Next up there is legislation. Now, the interesting part of the next parts of the conflict continuum that I'm going to talk about is that the order of this can change, because sometimes some of the things that I'm about to talk about will actually happen before legislation happens. So legislation is another thing. After litigation, you know, if you have something that's an overwhelming popular or unpopular thing, and then that's when the legislature, that's when the government steps in and says, you know what, we need to make this change. We need to update the laws and the rules to consider this particular issue. After that, you've got nonviolent and violent protests. So again, as I was just mentioning, sometimes the nonviolent or violent protests can happen before the legislation. Sometimes it takes those extra steps, the nonviolent protests or the violent protests, to get people's attention, to say, hey, you know what, something needs to be done about this. And we've seen a lot of that happening around the world just in the last few months. And of course, the final thing, the big one, that when a lot of people say conflict, when you use the word conflict, this is immediately what they think of, even though it's just one of many options on the conflict continuum, and that's war. That's the final option. That's after even legislation doesn't work and nonviolent and violent protests don't work. At that point, it escalates to the final thing, and that's war. And that's, again, what most people consider to be conflict. You with me so far? Hope so. So why don't you type conflict in the comments below if you got it. I know it's weird to type conflict, but go ahead and type that in the comments. So there are three main goals of conflict resolution. Now that we understand the conflict continuum, we understand all of the common forms of the conflict resolution, there are three main goals. Now, in future videos, I will dig into each of these things, because I know some of my colleagues in the conflict resolution, dispute resolution field will be like, there are way more goals than just these three. But I think for this particular video, just an overview, this pretty much hits the nail right on the head. So the three main goals of conflict resolution, the first one is to improve communication. You see that most of those things on the left side of the conflict continuum is all about communicating. Whether you're talking about the facilitation and the conflict coaching, it's about communicating to figure out what the options are, to figure out what's really causing this thing. Then you go into negotiation. It's about improving communication and negotiation to figure out what each side of the conflict or the dispute actually wants. Because, again, as I was mentioning before, nearly all a conflict is caused because somebody's expectations haven't been met. So it's really about conflict communication. Conflict resolution is about improving communication. Next of the three main goals of conflict resolution, resolving and managing the underlying conflict, because that's what got you here in the first place. So first, you have to improve communication between the people in the conflict before you can really understand what's going on with the conflict, what caused it, and then you can resolve or manage it. Because again, sometimes you can't resolve conflict. Sometimes the best you can hope for is to manage the conflict. And again, I was talking about those expectations not being met. The third of the three main goals of conflict resolution that we're talking about today, setting future expectations. A lot of times in all of those conflict resolution processes, you're setting those future expectations because maybe you weren't clear. Maybe what you think you meant when you said whatever it was you said isn't the same thing that they thought you said. So that's what it's all about, setting the future expectations, improving communication to make sure everybody's on the same page, and understanding definitions of each one of those. Because again, a lot of people, well, I'll use this as an example. If you said conflict to somebody, some people will believe that that's immediately war. Whereas somebody that works like I do in conflict resolution, dispute resolution, I think conflict, okay, well, where does it lie on the conflict continuum? So your definition of conflict and my definition of conflict aren't the same. So that's why we have to improve the communication and set those future expectations. Because nearly all conflict caused by someone's expectations not being met. Always keep that in the back of your mind. It'll be useful for you. So there you go. Now you know what conflict resolution is. You have the definition, you understand how it works, and please go back and watch this video again if you didn't catch all of the things I was talking about with the conflict continuum. It'll be very helpful. Save this, save it as a favorite so you can go back and watch it again if you need to. Again, I ask that you actually like our YouTube channel so that you'll know whenever we're doing future videos. I'm going to try to do one of these videos one time every week, and my goal right now is Tuesdays, unless I have some sort of consulting or other work that I have to do on a Tuesday. But subscribe on YouTube to the Resolution Stream channel and click that little bell there so you get a notification when I do one of these live streams. Also on Facebook, do the same thing and see first in your follow settings so that you'll see whenever I go live. It'll show up on your stream right there. And Resolution Stream on LinkedIn as well. Follow our page there, and we'll post these videos. You'll be able to see them on there as well. Now, you want to learn essential negotiation and conflict resolution skills online? I invite you to visit the website, resolutionstream.com. And again, you can schedule that free 30-minute conflict strategy call with me right there on the website as well. I try to make myself available most afternoons if I'm not doing other things, but you'll see the little calendar there on the website, and you can pick a time and date that works best for you a few days out. So again, appreciate everybody that's watching this stream. And again, go to resolutionstream.com if you want more information about any of the negotiation and conflict resolution skills and processes that I talked about here today. Thanks for watching.